This is Healing of a Nation. My name is Eric Goepel, founder of the Veterans Cannabis Coalition. With me today is Julia Thompson, a veteran and advocate. But first, a word from our sponsors.
Founded by former NFL All-Pro Kyle Turley, NeuroXPF is a sports supplement company specializing in the medicinal benefits of cannabinoids. NeuroXPF makes and sells a full line of high-quality, certified organic, hemp-derived CBD products. All NeuroXPF products are THC-free. They use a special CO2 extracting process to isolate the CBD, working hard to preserve the terpenes in order to modulate the effects of their hemp-derived CBD. This adds that little extra punch to NeuroXPF products so they taste better and provide some beneficial qualities. To learn more about and purchase the NeuroXPF's products, please visit their website at neuroxpf.com. For more information about their current investment opportunity, please visit the Wrazel investment marketplace at wrazel.com.
So with us today is Julia Thompson. Julia is a veteran. She is also a passionate advocate, both on cannabis issues and on wider issues affecting military health, but especially military sexual trauma. And with that, I'd love to hear, I'd love for you to share some about your background and, how you got to where you are here today. And
So, basically, I joined the military when I was 19. I'm from Los Angeles, California. So I'm the oldest of 5. I have 4 little brothers. And I didn't have any funds set aside for college. I had tried going to culinary school. It was way too expensive. So after 1 semester, I dropped out. I ended up joining the military as a cook, and because they told me I was going to cook on Air Force One. We've always joked around about that. Thank God.
Did that happen?
Thank God that didn't happen, no. Because I didn't know any better. But I actually took the test, and then they gave me an option of 6 jobs, so it was all military intelligence jobs. I ended up choosing counterintelligence agent, which was awesome because, I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but it was not a good mess, but I'm happy that it really pushed me, and I think more in positive ways than in the negative. But I deployed in August of 2005 until December of 2006. I was in first in Mosul and then in Baghdad. I was with the 172nd Striker Brigade. When I first got there, I was more so in the detention facilities doing interrogations, and then I got put attached to an infantry unit. 423 Infantry, the Tomahawks. Colonel Norris was so awesome. He was such a great mentor for me, and especially just being a young woman, he really gave me a lot of responsibility and expected me to kind of do it and exceed it. So I did. A lot of things happened to me there that I hadn't talked about for quite some time, but eventually once I started going through therapy and, unfortunately some of the pharmaceuticals, I had to start learning how to articulate what was going on in my life, speak more about it, speak better on it, learn how to talk to people who didn't understand what was going on, and really just try to find different ways of healing myself. And that's when I first got introduced to cannabis.
Well, I think you brought up a lot of very interesting points. I think especially for folks who, because we always hear it's like, a lot of the issues veterans run into is because they don't have access to mental health care. And the reality of mental health care is often, as your experience, pharmaceuticals, right? Yeah. And a lot of various kinds of therapy modalities or protocols. Considering, you were dealing with, you've dealt with both like physical and mental health issues that sort of compound one another. What was your experience, using pharmaceuticals and doing those therapies? What worked for you, if anything?
Well, I think a big problem that a lot of veterans face is control, not being controlled once you're out of the military. I don't think the military teaches you. A lot of people say they teach you discipline. I also think more so, instead of discipline, it's really obedience. They teach you how to do what you're told when you're told because there's consequences. A lot of times in civilian life, there's no consequences like in the military. So you start learning very fast, I don't want to be punished. So a lot of what you do is because of punishment or lack of punishment. You want, it's you want to gain rank and stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that you just have to do when you're supposed to do it, and that's how you gain rank. or the time, hopefully being in the right time, right place. But for me, when I came back, I started really having a lot of problems with my eyes. But initially, when I came back, because it was early on in the war, a lot of the people, providers, the healthcare providers, the doctors, weren't used to seeing women with combat PTSD because we didn't really have a lot of women in combat early on. So for me, it wasn't, I did suffer military sexual trauma, MST. But that didn't affect me as much as the combat affected me as a woman, I think. Just because I had never shot at anybody prior to the military. I had never been in a situation where it was a firefight or I was getting shot at. I had never been shot at. So, and that's not common. But to do it on a day-to-day basis consistently over and over again, or being in interrogations where I'm in front of a grown man who's a beheader, if I had to watch a beheading and then go into interrogate a beheader, it kind of stirred up these emotions in me that at 20 years old, a young woman should not ever feel these kinds of feelings. It's just not normal. But it's something that you have to grow accustomed to because it's something you deal with on a day-to-day basis. You're dealing with death. A lot of young women are dealing with giving life, birth, being a mom, and I'm here dealing with my friends dying every single day. So a lot of the healthcare providers, when I came back, they were trying to give me military sexual trauma, rape counseling. And I was like, no, I'm having nightmares about interrogations or being kidnapped and being tortured. So it was hard. I definitely had a long road. They gave me a lot of, I think, easy diagnoses for them. It's very common to hear bipolar, borderline personality, but I think any veteran or any military person, when you come back, you are dealing with two sides of yourself, which they may say as being bipolar, but you're just trying to be like you were before the war, but you're never going to be that way again. So you're almost fighting this losing battle, and I think that's where a lot of veterans come up and feel so defeated. So it's easier to take pharmaceuticals to, almost numb those things out, but a lot of these drugs are causing memory loss now that they're seeing, I was on Ambien for 7 years.
Wow.
So when doctors try to tell me take melatonin, meditate, valerian root, drink tea, it's like, no, I was on Ambien. It was so hardcore for me at that young of an age to be on something so consistently on a day-to-day basis that people are usually on Ambien for 2 weeks. It's a quick fix for civilians. For us, I think it's like a long-term problem because then once the VA, all of a sudden they cut these drugs for us, and that's when like the paranoia and the schizophrenia almost set in where you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do without these drugs? But once I learned about cannabis and I started using cannabis, it was like it slowly started giving me the power to take my life back, because with antidepressants you have to take those every single day, and if you forget one dose or a day or 2 days because these drugs cause memory loss, or you're just depressed, or you're trying to be rebellious and you think I'm not going to take my pills today, it really bites you in the ass later on. So when I got a hold of cannabis and started using it, it was like, oh, I can use this when I want to use it, and it makes me feel better.
There's no backlash,
right,
as there is with, and whether it's antidepressants or, benzodiazepines, drugs along the lines of like Valium and Xanax. There's a lot of drugs that people take, for long-term, for long periods of time, for chronic illnesses that, you build up either dependence on, not necessarily addiction, because that comes with very specific kind of behaviors.
There's a lot of withdrawals.
But but obviously you're always at risk. Once you're on those kinds of medications, it becomes very difficult at any point to ever get off of them.
Yeah.
Right. And I know, not from personal experience, but obviously we've talked in the past, and I've talked with obviously friends and a lot of other veterans who have all dealt with very similar, who've gotten the same drugs, because the VA basically has a handful of drugs of every class that it will cycle you through if it thinks it will help. So, and the story is always the same, right? Like, I could get to a certain amount, but then I was either having horrific nightmares, or like I was having seizures in terms of like benzodiazepines. So there's such a cost that comes along with long-term pharmaceutical use of certain kinds, but it's so it's such a contrast with cannabis. And really, you're right.
Because like liver damage, people like my doctor wants to sit here and say, well, you're drinking too much, and I'm like, no, I've been on pills almost every single day for years. That's going to cause other problems.
Yeah, your liver and your kidneys
Yeah.
are your primary like filtration devices in your body, right? And they process all the synthetic pharmaceuticals that you're taking, and they build up.
I mean,
or
these
they
things
damage.
cause like GI problems too.
Right.
You know, I've talked to you about this, like MREs. It's not normal to eat 2 or 3 MREs a day because those things are 2,000 calories each. But for a 21, 22, 23-year-old, you're burning a lot of calories. But 6,000 calories of eating food in one day is a lot. It's going to cause problems. These things also cause a lot of GI problems. So you're dealing with young people having problems that their grandparents have. Of course,
Right.
it's going to affect you mentally. When I'm in a doctor's office and I'm seeing people that are either super like tweaked out because of these drugs, or they're just like vegetables. You know, it's like I don't want to be either one of these. But the VA needs to, like, I was just arguing with my doctor, like, you have to work with me. I'm willing to work with you, but you have to work with me too. You know,
Right.
you're here.
It's a relationship. I
Right,
mean, it should be
exactly.
between the doctor and the patient, right?
Yeah.
And trying to find what is giving most benefit with the least harm
Right.
as possible. And unfortunately, it seems like most veterans, there's guidelines that they stick to, and that's basically it, right? Like,
Yeah.
so if hey, you've done the therapies, you've done the classes, we've given you all the drugs, like we don't have anything else for you other than maybe adjusting your drugs, or maybe we've got a new therapy that you can try,
Yeah.
or plug
It's like just
use
they
this
try to
device,
they try to
yeah.
like figure you out. But and we've talked about this too, just as far as gender, me being a female.
Right.
There, nobody asked me if I wanted to be a mom before the military, and there are no studies done on pregnant women and any of these drugs, any of these antidepressants or these sleep drugs, because you can't give pregnant women pharmaceuticals like for a test study. It's unethical. It's not morally right. But like, what about us veterans, where every time I got pregnant, which was 3 times, I was on birth control, but I was also on so many of these drugs that here I am 3 months pregnant, and it's like, what am I supposed to do? I can't go to the VA because the VA doesn't do abortions; it's government
Right.
funded. So now I'm stuck in a situation where I can't even now. I mean, it doesn't even matter because I can't just stop taking these drugs, lithium or Ambien, any of these drugs tomorrow. You're supposed to tear off of these, but now my baby has had these drugs for 2 to 3 months. 3 months, really, as long as I've had them. So, puts you in a situation where and it's hard to say this, but no man is ever going to have to, unfortunately, kill his child because he's on drugs for PTSD and he's really trying to get help. Like, mentally, I was not even prepared to be a mother at that time, but it's like I didn't even have an option. So the VA has to start coming up with better options holistically where, what if I say tomorrow, okay, I want to start, working to be a mom, get me off all these drugs. Then what are they going to do? Are they going to challenge that I don't have PTSD because I'm not on pharmaceuticals that they want me to be on?
Right.
So it really comes like it's always it's like, I don't want to say it's always going to be a problem, but it always has been a problem with me just living my life, trying to do the right thing. Like I've had, almost, I think it's like 40, 41, 42 jobs in the last 12 years. Not because I'm not competent, I have my bachelor's degree. It's because I have so many appointments at the VA 2 times a week, 3 times a week. I'm going to classes or just my appointments. It's like no employer is going to be okay if you have a
Right.
normal Monday through Friday 9 to 5 job with you missing 2 or 3 days a week. And it's hard when you come back from the VA. It's exhausting. So, I mean, they need to start finding better options because we have so many more younger people. Like the older people are dying out, unfortunately, now, and then we have that middle class, but we are having so many more people getting out. The VAs aren't getting any bigger. They're trying to build bigger parking lots, but like the VAs aren't getting any bigger. We're just having more people. And that's like, even with the suicide, what we've talked about, like
Yeah.
that 22 a day, if 22 of us are killing ourselves each day, that's really population control for us. We're killing ourselves, so the VA doesn't have to do anything. That's 22 more spots that open up for them to start trying new drugs on new people.
Well, I mean, I think with the VA especially, it's they're massively understaffed. There's
Yeah.
I think last count there was about 50,000 vacancies within the VA, and most of those were in the Veterans Health Administration, which is the part of the VA that provides health care to between 6 to 9 million veterans a year. There's about 9 million enrolled and 6 million-ish that who, by last count, like use the VA in a given year. But like the veteran population is actually declining year to year. So
Yeah.
there are less veterans every year. However, the problems that veterans are facing now are actually made, I think, worse and more expensive and harder to treat
Yeah.
because of the initial styles of treatment that the VA and private health, because the VA is not unique in this. So, only about a third of veterans use VA for healthcare. The other, 2/3 or 12 million or so basically use private health, which includes Medicare and Medicaid and employer-based insurance. The problem is the drugs. The modality is the same, right? If you're coming into a doctor and you present with depression and anxiety and chronic pain and sleeplessness and you can just sort of stack the conditions
stuff,
from there,
yeah,
right?
Same things,
you're going to walk out of there with probably at least 3 to 4 drugs.
A whole,
at least,
and a box on the way to your
right.
house.
Especially, well, if you're a veteran, especially, and I don't know why this is necessarily. I mean, I could probably make guesses like why there's such a knee-jerk reaction to over-medicate veterans. It's like, in what doctor, and this is a rhetorical question because they can't, no doctor basically can point to any evidence to support giving anyone all of those drugs in combination for any period of time, let alone for years at a time, right? It is the antithesis of evidence-based medicine. And yet, that is exactly what veterans get on a regular basis. It's these untested, it's these, yes, individual drugs might be FDA approved, but who the hell knows what they do in combination, especially, for chronic conditions that they're not necessarily even approved for, because the amount of off-label prescribing that happens in the VA and private health as well is
Side note.
is pretty extensive. So obviously there's limits to what pharmaceuticals can do, and there's real concerns that they can actually create more problems than they're solving. And I don't know if you would say that about yourself, but I know certainly veterans there are certainly veterans that would say that, right? Like they would have been better off with no medications and just never having started on any of these things.
I remember getting off the plane from Iraq and getting a brown paper bag and it had Wellbutrin and Ambien, and it's like I never.
Wellbutrin is an antidepressant, but yeah.
I mean, I feel like I never had a chance.
Right.
I'd never been on pills before that. Thank God I had my top secret security clearance, because when they tried to hit me with bipolar borderline, I was like, well, if I had all these psych evals to get my top secret security clearance, then somebody somewhere along the lines would have seen something and said, hey, maybe this 18, 19-year-old girl is bipolar. Maybe we shouldn't put her in a counterintelligence job or an interrogator job. But that was never the case. I was totally fine. It's just when you go through something at such a young age that is the complete opposite of what you think is supposed to be happening, and you question it, but silently question it. So you're keeping a lot of secrets inside of you, and I think that's why a lot of veterans too, you're dealing with guilt and all these things like regret, and maybe not regret, but guilt of what happened. Maybe things you wanted differently to happen, or if you would have made a right instead of a left, and somebody would have not died, or something,
and you're getting into, like we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, and you describe situations where, you were regularly in combat or in, like high intensity, interrogation situations, right? And the constant overload of stimulus, there's this idea that like PTSD is essentially your brain getting stuck in a certain mode, right? It's stuck in this fight or flight mode because you've overstimulated that part of your brain, and now you've basically kind of burned in a sort of way of acting when certain other stimuli, hit you. So you hear a noise, your lizard brain basically snaps back to that situation where you were in fear for your life, or in fear for the life of others, or you did something, engaged in a violent act, or any number of situations that can be traumatic, and that's what you're brought back to. And there's this idea that one of the reasons why cannabis is so effective for veterans that are dealing with PTSD is because PTSD is such a both mental and physical condition that you're dealing with, and because cannabis, especially even in its like most basic forms, it's hitting a lot of different spots at once, right? It's a sort of blast of molecules to your receptors, and they're all doing things, and most of them seem pretty beneficial. So especially if that's what you're starting with, not being able to sleep, being in pain, being constantly anxious. Now, of course, cannabis works differently for everyone,
right?
And obviously, how it interacts with other pharmaceutical drugs, like no one can really tell us, but we understand, through lived experience and through research, that there's so much there. but you touched on something else too, talking about like guilt and regret. These things that aren't necessarily PTSD, but they still can cause depression and anxiety.
Right.
And it's like, and that's more, what's been deemed like moral injury. This idea that you've transgressed some, internal moral ethical boundary, or you've seen that, either, participated or witnessed it
Right.
often, right? And I think that's probably that is probably the most common, especially for combat troops, especially for post 9/11, folks like done deployments to Iraq, worked as a defense contractor in Afghanistan myself. I never stopped questioning the rightness of what we were doing or why
Right.
we were there, or was anything that we did meaningful or beneficial. And then often you come back with the answer to that question is no, right? What we did didn't matter, right? The people that we knew who died, they died in vain,
right.
because the things that we built fell apart immediately after we left, or maybe they didn't even survive the deployment that we were on, right?
And that Mosul got taken back over, and it made me so. When it happened, I was like, "What did we do?" Like all these people.
What was that for?
Yeah, it's for nothing. And I think when you're in the military, it's easier to ignore those questions of justification because you're in a group setting, so everybody's on the same mission.
Right.
But it's when you go off alone, and then you're around civilians, and people are asking you, like, "What was it like? Like, did you think what you were doing was right?" And it's those questions that, like, then you start asking yourself, and then it's like you always come back to the same answer. Where,
well, it's funny you bring that up because, like, I don't think I've ever had at least someone who didn't know me, or even people who know me, ever asked, like, what did you think about, like, the morality or, like, the ethics of what you did out there? Those were questions that I wished more people would ask. Because,
I think it was because I was bartending, so
right.
I had so many. I mean, people would be getting drunk.
People getting drunk
me,
and feel a little bit more bold.
They were
huh?
like, "Oh, you have tattoos. Where'd you get it?" I'm like, "Oh, in the military." "What'd you do?" "I was an interrogator." "Did you waterboard anybody?" I'm
okay.
like, "No,
well, you're right.
No more drinks for you."
You're right. I was a computer guy, so there's a little different line of work. Certainly.
It was, but still, it's just like people. I think bartending for me was such a huge positive, it had some negative aspects to it too, but I just was dealing with so many civilians that had never had a female combat veteran, a female veteran in general, but just a combat veteran in front of them. Like, what was it like? So it was like day to day to day, and I had to learn how to take the emotion out of the story and just be fact-based. Like, this is what's going on. This is what veterans are dealing with now. Like, yes, this happened in the military, but this is how you can help. Like, this is what's going on, and this is how you can help. Because you always got to give a solution almost.
Well, I mean,
how can you help?
I love that you were, even as a bartender, you were essentially advocating.
Yeah. I didn't think so, but
right.
yeah,
I mean, that's
did.
what it is, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you identified the problem and you came up with a solution and you were telling people about it. That is the basis of advocacy. So, it makes sense that you're continuing on and in the work that you're doing today.
Medicus LP was created after their team discovered that very few avenues existed for investment in professionally managed public equity funds. As a result, they created a long-biased limited partnership, Medicus, for accredited individuals and organizations that will invest in public exchange-traded companies in the cannabis space. Investor net asset values are calculated on a monthly basis by their administrator, Klein Fund Services, and audited annually by Spicer Jeffries. This provides full transparency for investors. Their prime broker is BTIG and custodian is Pershing. Medicus started investing in January 2020. To learn more about Medicus, please visit their website at medicuslp.com. And for more information about their current investment opportunity, please visit the Wrazel investment marketplace at wrazel.com.
So, we've talked about MST and the experience of women veterans, women service members, and the exposure to, trauma in the military, not coming from combat, which is very new, as well as, from military sexual trauma. And one of the major cases in the news right now is that of Vanessa Guillen, who was a Army soldier who was sexually harassed and murdered at Fort Hood, and it took 2 months of investigations, essentially, and the advocacy of her family, mostly, to force the authorities to investigate, and they eventually found her body and discovered the way that she died. Obviously, that's going to bring up a lot of issues for service members, especially women service members who have dealt with military sexual trauma themselves. I'd love to hear, your thoughts on that and, maybe how other folks can help.
Yeah, I never being a survivor of military sexual trauma, a lot of people don't really know the statistics, and I think they're pretty much kind of up in the air, but really it's almost like 1 in 3 women gets sexually assaulted, deals with MST, and it's 1 in 5 men. Some say 1 in 6 men, but that means that there's a lot of military sexual trauma that is happening to both men and women in the military.
Right.
With Vanessa's, case, I mean, this is happening. It's very common on Fort Hood. Vanessa, I never personally met her, but I feel like I know her. I've cried for her. I've cried for her family. A lot of women have. As negative as this has been, I think so many of us can say that she is our champion almost. We have looked up to her. We never wanted any woman to be the face of military sexual trauma, but she has opened up so many conversations for people to talk. There's protests. I've never protested until this happened, and it was so I had to do it because I am a survivor, and people need to know there's not very many of us, but so many women deal with it. We're just such a small population of people. But I don't think any military person should ever be in fear of being hurt or sexually traumatized by another person of our military. That's unheard of. There's no reason it should be happening. But right now, there's a lot of conversations going on. We're really pushing for legislation in D.C. to get the I Am Vanessa Guillen bill passed, which I think that's gonna. As much bad has been done, you can't change. You can't change that, but you can help people learn and understand what's going on. We need to have a better system in the military where we don't have to report to people in the military. That should have never been the case, but it is the case, and it's going to be changed now. There's enough of us that are pushing for this that have been weak in the beginning. I think a lot of us it was like wounds that were really old that we were opening up, but I got on a Zoom with a whole bunch of girls women that had been through the same thing I had been through, and it was like, it's like when you feel a certain way and somebody puts a name on that feeling, right. And it's like it made everything okay. This is not just me; it's a lot of people, and now there's so many people who are on our side who are pushing for us. And unfortunately, because of what happened to Vanessa, massive change is going to happen, and we all know that. So I think, just really getting involved in your community. If you look up, I Am Vanessa Guillen, anything on Instagram or anything on Facebook, you'll see any local, protests or vigils that are going on for her, and just really continuing opening up education and opening up conversation about military sexual trauma, and then not really putting a stigma on it, but just letting the survivors know that it's okay, and there's a lot more people that are here for them now.
Military sexual trauma and the experience of women service members and women veterans, I think, is a massively underreported issue, and there are so many really tragic and avoidable and things that anyone with authority and power, I think, should be obligated to change with how women are treated throughout the military and veteran community. So, to your point, it's awful when someone like Vanessa Guillen, just like Floyd, George Floyd, has to be the face or become the face of a persistent and rampant issue that people just really aren't paying attention to. But now that is the case, it falls to everyone else, I think, to look to what they can do personally and do it, right? And often that is just as simple as using your voice and reaching out to your member of Congress or your other elected representatives, and letting them know that this is an important issue to you, right? A phone call can make a lot of difference. I think we sort of discount the power of our own voice, but as advocates, that is often the only thing we do have. So. Thank you, Julia, for coming in and talking to me about a very difficult subject. And thank you for listening and for watching. My name is Eric Goepel, and this is Healing of a Nation.